Welcome to the Blue Yonder Overland podcast. I'm your host, Jen, and I'm so excited to welcome you back for our 16th episode. This podcast is dedicated to helping you get more adventure in your life, however that looks, but especially to make overlanding more approachable. So each week, we try to provide tips for vehicle-based adventuring, as well as interviews with folks that are doing it, and sort of breaking down the barriers to how you can have more adventure in your life. If you hear anything that you want to reference in terms of links or places that are mentioned, we'll put all those show notes available online at blueyonder-adventures.com. And for today, I'm excited to delve into a guest interview. Welcome to the Blue Yonder Overland podcast. I'm your host, Jen, and I'm very excited to have with me today an actual former classmate of mine from my hometown in Iowa, Mykal Lefevre, although I always want to call you Michael Clayton because that was the name I first met you under. To give everyone listening just a little bit of background on Mykal, like I mentioned, we met because I moved to Spirit Lake, Iowa, a tiny little town when I was 13. And so we were classmates after that. And we were in marching band, jazz band, all the band activities, AP Chemistry, AP Calc. We both went to Iowa State. And that is where I would say our paths sharply diverged when I became a history major and Mykal made the much smarter choice of pursuing aerospace engineering as a career. Mykal has gone on and done some awesome work after college, doing really cool rocketry and moon mission things with folks like Lockheed Martin, and now currently working for Blue Origin, which is one of the reasons we got reconnected since you started having some business trips to Seattle. But Mykal and I also really reconnected last year when Matt and I moved to the Denver area where Mykal and her husband live. And she was instrumental in helping me re-engage with adventures, particularly mountain biking, while we lived there. We also were able to rediscover our love for jazz, going to some live jazz last winter, which was awesome. And I also learned that Mykal has gotten into overlanding, which brings us to our conversation today. But Mykal also is super curious and into things like foraging for mushrooms, knitting projects, lots of creative ventures. So I just, love the curious way in which you engage with the world. Is there anything else that you would like listeners to know up front about interests or things that are important to you?
I think that was a very kind introduction. So thank you for so much detail. I think you covered all of it.
Okay. The big things. And we'll revisit some of those.
Yeah.
Perfect. So circling back, it's interesting because as long as I've known you and as many shared experiences as we've had in the classroom or musically, I actually don't really know much about the origin story of your relationship to the outdoors and camping and those types of adventures. So it was really funny when we reconnected and I found out that you actually have a very similar overlanding setup to Matt's original setup, which is a Tacoma with a rooftop tent. So
Yes.
tell me a little bit about, did you grow up camping or what was your relationship like to camping? And then how did you get into overlanding?
Yeah. So I'm going to start by going way, way back to actually my mother's childhood. So my
Okay.
grandparents, it's a long way back. My grandparents, they owned a like a fishing resort on the banks of a lake in northern Minnesota, and that's where my mother grew up. And the name of the resort is Whaley's. It still exists. My grandparents don't own it anymore, but it was a small campground and then a dozen or so cabins, and they were on the shores of Many Point Lake. And it was across the lake from a Boy Scout camp up in northern Minnesota, and we spent my summers there while they still
Amazing.
had it. Yeah. So that was the beginning of my experience with camping, I guess. We got to live in the house, so like we didn't camp, but it was still like a lot of experience with, fishing, cleaning out boats. I was pretty young back then, but like we would help take care of the cabins and strip the beds and all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. And then there was a bait shop, and we would go on what my grandmother would always call walks in the woods. So we would like
Love
regularly
that.
just go wander through the woods. And this is why whenever I hike, I keep my eyes down and never up. So I'm always looking for like what are all the plants that are around here? What are all the trees that are around here? So my grandmother made sure that we all knew our local flora. And so
Wow. That
that
is
was
so cool.
yeah.
What a rich experience to be taught
Yeah.
all of that as a kid. That's amazing.
It was really fun. So that's the beginning. And then like my parents would take us camping a little bit growing up. We lived in Nebraska for a while and we had a tent and we'd drive out to Colorado and stay. We went on this big trip that I remember. I was probably 8 or 9, and we did the Grand Canyon and Yosemite and
Ooh.
Redding. For some reason, we went to Redding, California, and then Tahoe and like a big loop back. And I remember camping. Then we also had the conversion van that my parents had, which we stayed in
Ooh.
for one night because there was bubonic plague in the squirrels. That's what I remember.
Wow. Oh, that's a memorable experience.
Yeah.
Bubonic plague in squirrels. You don't hear
There's
that very
still
often.
bubonic plague in squirrels in the Southwest, so you still have to be careful. But I think that
Interesting.
that was an overreaction to what was bubonic plague in squirrels, and that's fine. And we we live and learn and move on.
Yes. Well, that's so
Yeah,
interesting though that not only were you guys tent camping, but also a little bit foraging into the vehicle camping.
yeah. And so yeah, we lived in Nebraska, and we had just this big. My mother called it her living room on wheels. It was just like those, you know, mid 80s conversion vans, you know the ones. This one was
Yep,
brown
yep.
with brown. It was very brown. It was all brown.
Sounds very 80s. Love it.
Yeah, it was good stuff. Um,
So then I'm kind of curious then, like as you progress into adulthood or like, college or just after college then, did you kind of keep camping that whole time or was there a rediscovery sort of as an adult of these activities?
so my husband and I got married pretty young for the times. We had just graduated college, and we didn't have any money. Um, so the goal was to we got married. I graduated, and we were moving to Denver. Um, so we needed to get ourselves to Denver to start my job. So our honeymoon was actually camping. So we did,
Love
uh,
it.
yeah, we did the Badlands, like Mount Rushmore area, Yosemite, and then did 2 nights at Chatfield or maybe 3 nights at Chatfield State Park in Colorado. And I remember just it being so hot that we got ourselves up at like 5 or 6 a.m. because our tent was just sweltering and we didn't have
Oh.
anywhere to go. So we'd like go find some place that had cooler weather, like inside. So
Oh
that was
man.
our second camping experience, and then Brad's grandmother actually got us that tent for our wedding gift, and it was where we lived for like 2.5 weeks until
I
our
love
apartment opened
that.
up. Yeah.
Wow. What a cool start to your marriage and a very memorable honeymoon.
Yeah. We did get some hotels just because occasionally it's nice to sleep in a real bed. So,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes. Yeah, gotta break up that trip a little bit, especially if it's
Yeah.
sweltering. There's not much you can
Yeah.
do sleeping in a tent. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so then tell me about your guys' discovery of sort of overlanding or what led you down the route to getting a rooftop tent on your vehicle?
Yeah. So I had a job opportunity in California where I would be working at Jet Propulsion Laboratory. So that was the job
Sweet.
opportunity for a year. And I had a place to live there. And it was an option for my spouse to join me for most of that time. So while we also had a dog, um, and we had been looking into like a setup before, we actually had our list on the name for a one of those fancy like overlanding vans, like custom
Yep.
setups, and it was just like so much money. um,
Yeah.
but we did have our name on the list, so like it wasn't too much of a jump to like go into a camping overlanding type setup. So
Mhm.
anyway, the reason that we ended up with a Tacoma with the rooftop tent is we needed a place for our dog to go camping with us. She was pretty old at the time. She was 12, but still getting around quite well. But she
Yeah.
was also not a dog that enjoyed being next to us very often. So she needed her own space. So having
Ooh.
the dog, Marzipan was her name. She slept in the bed of the Tacoma in her own bed. And then we
Aw.
slept in the top and left the little like overhang open so we could see her. And she had like a
Aw.
heating pad. And it was just mostly so we could go camping with our dog in a way that made Marcy the most comfortable.
That's
Um,
adorable. Love
yeah.
that.
So while we were in California, we wanted to make sure that we had a setup that could do that. So we were looking at like a couple of different pull behind options, and the the Brad said one thing to me. Brad's my husband. One thing to me, he's like, I can't imagine trying to pull a trailer through LA traffic, and I'm like, yep, you're
Ooh,
right.
good
So
point.
that was what sealed the deal. So we're just
Yes.
like, okay, Tacoma and a rooftop tent camper. So we ended up going with basically whatever Brad could throw together in like the 2 months that he had before he was coming out to California. So he was able to um, find us a Tacoma and find us a used Alucab and get the whole thing
Wow.
put together because he's one of those exceptional individuals that can pull that kind of stuff off and is just very focused. And drove the Tacoma and Marzi, our dog, out to California. And then we did like many trips back to Colorado in that truck as well. So it made that trip
Awesome.
quite a few times
Yeah.
because we had we had to split our time between California and Colorado. So that
Luckily,
was
a
the
lot
best
of
way to
good,
do it.
yeah, and a lot of good camping destinations between
Yeah,
those
along the
two.
way. Yes. So there was a couple of places that Brad would stop in Utah. I usually got to fly, which was to say pretty amazing. But Brad and Marzi drove in the
Did a
Tacoma.
lot of driving.
Yeah.
Oh,
And the goal was to make sure that we had time to go through California and
yeah.
go to a couple of different places there. So we tried to get out, like every other weekend probably, and go various places. And then we did a longer trip up in Northern California while we were preparing for winter time as well. And that was
Nice.
nice. Yeah.
That's so awesome to get to take
Mhm.
advantage of that for the time that you were there.
Yeah.
So then as you guys did more and more camping, I'm curious if there's, any one adventure. Obviously, the honeymoon itself is pretty memorable already as a camping experience, but any adventure that really stands out in your mind as a favorite camping experience from any of your camping adventures, or vice versa, one that went very wrong, went off the rails, but maybe you learned something from it. Either of the two, highlight or low light that you'd like to share.
So, in terms of our joint adventures, the trip to Northern California was pretty special. We stayed amongst the redwoods for quite some time, and that was really lovely. I tried to go to places with trees.
Love that. Yep.
That's my destination of choice. And it was just really nice. So we spent, I think, probably 6 or 7 days just driving around. We went to San Francisco. We drove across Golden Gate to Sausalito, and we stayed in Point Reyes for a bit and did some hiking and walking and beach combing. Our dog loved to walk on the beach, not because she liked walking on the beach, but she really liked crab. So she liked to, whenever she found a dead crab, it was just chaos. So, um,
Oh, that's hilarious.
yeah. So that was probably my favorite. And for a solo trip, the year after we moved back, I did a Northern California trip by myself in the Tacoma with the Alu cab, and I did. It was, I think, 9 days, and I went all the way to Fort Bragg, California, and then north to Eureka. I tried to go to Crater Lake, that didn't work out for me, and then
Okay.
came back to Denver. So it was this big trip,
Wow.
solo. I drove it all myself. Lots of long days, and it
Yes.
was just really nice. um,
Yes.
I had two destinations on that trip. One was Glass Beach in Fort Bragg. I just thought, why not? So
Yeah.
I made sure that I hit that location. And then the other one was Fern Canyon, which is where they filmed the intro to Jurassic Park, which is
Okay.
in Redwoods State Parks. So
Wow.
I made sure to hit that one too. And I planned a trip around those places and had a really great time. I did some mushroom hunting and foraging while I was there. I didn't get to keep any mushrooms because I didn't really have a good plan for how to cook them.
Okay.
But I did pick some amazing blueberries and some amazing blackberries and
Nice.
raspberries. Yeah.
So, I think that's a perfect segue then to discussing foraging a little bit more. And it sounds like you grew up with your grandmother imparting so much knowledge about the plants that you might encounter to you. So that's such an awesome sort of baseline foundation to have. But then as an adult, sort of how did you get into foraging and especially looking for yummy things to eat while camping?
Yeah. So that was definitely my grandmother. I would say that the style of foraging that I do currently is not the same as the style that she did. But I
Okay.
do remember many times that we would go out for a walk in the woods and we would specifically be looking for what she called sulfur shelf mushrooms or chicken
Okay.
of the woods.
Okay.
I do not recall ever finding any. So that is interesting, but I'm sure my grandmother has a different story. Um, but they grow on oak logs, oak trees, dying oaks, and the location that they lived in northern Minnesota was mixed forest, so deciduous and some conifer. And so very rarely were there oaks, but there were few and far between you could find them. And
Okay.
so that's the kind of mushroom that we were looking for. And then I also remember um, my father and my mother and my sisters, we did morel mushroom hunting one time in Nebraska, which was
Mhm.
really interesting when we lived there. So morels, they grow in the riverbeds near the cottonwoods in Nebraska.
Okay.
And also there's feral or wild asparagus there too. It's not a native plant, but it does
Interesting.
grow in the same area that the morel mushrooms grow. So I remember basically those things. Oh, and one more that is uh, very foundational is giant puffball mushrooms. We would find those with my grandmother as well. And I
Okay.
remember just like they can be like the size of your head, even bigger. So I remember these giant puffball mushrooms, and you can like take them home and peel them up, and you can basically use them as pizza, like they're the size of small personal pan pizzas. So you
Oh,
can like slice
wow.
them up and make a pizza on them or dice them or whatever. So I remember
Like a,
doing that with
a
my
nice little
grandmother.
base for things. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
but soggy. So like
Yeah.
yeah. So those are the things that I remember foraging when I was young. Also, we would go out into the woods and pick raspberries and gooseberries, which are a type of currant, and blueberries as well. So
Okay.
lots of wild food.
Yeah.
My grandparents also did some hunting, so they would have venison and of
Yum.
course fishing. So we would have
Mhm.
amazing walleye fish and sunfish and all of that, and a wild plethora to eat. Yeah, it was great.
Amazing.
Hmm.
So then I'm curious, as you explored like your time in California or after moving to Colorado, what was your favorite way of learning about new what you could find in that local area. Like, what are the best resources for folks to go to if they're moving to a new area or exploring a new area? Where did you go to learn about what was available locally?
Yeah, so I actually got a bunch of books, just wild food books. I
Okay.
like to have them in the field with me because, uh,
Yes.
you might not have cell service,
Yes.
and it's good to just have it in your backpack. So for the longest time, I would just always take a couple of books out with me. Most of them were related to plants, and this is something my grandmother used to do. She'd have the wildflowers book with her and the bird book. Um, and so I take them with me. And then if I see something that looks of interest or I can't identify it, I will either take a picture of it and look it up in the car. Sometimes I take some with me, which is something that my grandmother still does to this day. She'll like pick a piece of the plant and like carry it back to the house to try to identify it. Or I'll flip through the book in the field if I'm like trying to know if I can eat it or not.
Yeah.
Um, which is really important because
Yes.
gathering berries or something that is potentially dangerous without having all pieces of the plant to identify can
Yes.
be very challenging. So if you're just taking a piece of the plant rather than the whole plant, then you better know that that is edible before you start separating all of those things and
Okay.
bringing home just the berry because it's
That's
sometimes hard to identify with just a berry, for example.
Okay. That's really good advice, and that's actually been a question at the back of my mind. I think that has scared me from going further down the foraging route is that without a lot of study first, I think I'm so scared that I would stumble upon things that have bad side effects or are poisonous versus edible. So, do you
Yeah.
have advice for but that's a really good one, and bring the whole plant with if you need to identify it. Any other
Yeah.
tips?
Or take pictures and make sure you can identify it like 3 times correctly before you eat it. That's another thing that I
Mm,
did with mushrooms is that like I would pick a mushroom specifically with the purpose of identifying it and
mm.
bring that home, go through the whole process of identification and then not eat that particular mushroom and then try to find it again in the wild and
Okay.
do the same thing and be like,
That's fantastic
yeah,
advice. Yeah, to learn to look for those little variations where it is the same thing, but it's a different
yeah.
location or slightly different. Oh, that's great.
And then I'll tell you a couple of stories about like I think I'm better at identifying plants and specifically edible deliciousness that exists on plants. Berries. I said berries many times, but berries are like you should know the handful of delicious berries that you want to go after, like huckleberries,
Yes.
blueberries, raspberries, blackberries. And then beyond that, you're kind of into just fun berries, like the novelty berries. I don't know if they all taste that good, but those four, it's just good to know. And if you can identify those, they're the same across the US, and you're in for a good time
We have a
munching.
ton of
Yeah,
wild blackberries out here. They're actually quite invasive, and so we're
yes,
constantly cutting them back from, like, different trails. I was just doing some trail maintenance this weekend, and they just try to take over, and of course, they have little thorns on the vines, and so they could be quite dangerous if you're trying to bike or walk through the trails. So we're cutting them all back, but at the same time, I'm eyeing them, like, to come back to these locations later to pick the berries.
yeah. They're so good. I
They
did
are.
because of my plant identification skills, I was in Germany at the Nürburgring. And it's surrounded by the same like invasive blackberries that are in the
Amazing.
Pacific Northwest. So my husband and I were there watching like just people go around the Nürburgring. Um, and I was like mostly had my eyes on the mushrooms that were growing and the blackberries. And I was eating all of these blackberries and they were delicious.
Amazing.
Um, so it's transferable as well. Although when you do that, you should be very aware of what other lookalikes can grow in those areas because
Mm,
just because you know what a blackberry looks like in the US, it's and what you could confuse it with in the US, once you take that knowledge and you take it to a different continent or even a different region of the US, it can be a
yeah.
little sketchy. So I do think that I kind of pushed, particularly with the mushrooms, pushed the knowledge of the edges of my knowledge with that particular trip. We did find chanterelles, which I
Ooh,
never actually found I'd found them a couple of times in the wild in Colorado. They're kind of tricky to find here. I feel like other people have better luck than I do with chanterelles, but we found them in Germany, and I was able to identify them, and we did
nice.
eat them. But I was like, man, that was probably a little bit too close to the edge of what was reasonable there, because I didn't know all the lookalikes that were um, around the area. So I do feel like I
Yeah,
got a little out of my zone on
that's a
reflection.
really,
So I wouldn't
really good
recommend
advice
that.
as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Um, in terms of my uh, who helped me learn the most about mushroom hunting in Colorado. So I had my books, and I made an effort to just one time I went out and I just like picked a bunch of mushrooms again with the goal of identifying them. And I knew I was in the right time for porcinis or boletes. Same mushroom. Boletus rubiceps is what they call it. The scientific name for them in Colorado.
Okay.
And so I was trying to find those. I was using the Colorado Mycological Society Facebook page to know
Okay.
when everyone else was finding mushrooms in Colorado,
Yeah.
porcinis specifically.
Yep.
So I went out and I picked a bunch of different mushrooms, and I picked the ones that I did think were porcini as well, just for the goal of identifying.
Mm-hmm.
And I was driving home, and there was a woman who was also picking mushrooms who I saw loading just totes full into her Subaru. And
Wow.
I was like, this is my first time. This lady seems to know what's up.
Yes.
So I drove past her, and then I was like, I should turn around. So I turned around and I pulled up behind her, and I brought all my mushrooms out. And I was like, this is my first time mushroom hunting. And this lady was from Eastern Europe, and she had been looking for these types of mushrooms her entire life. And she went through my bag and just like helped me figure out which ones were good or not. And I did have the goal of like identifying all these mushrooms. So I had separated the ones that I knew were not edible from the ones that I
Yeah.
knew were edible.
Mm-hmm.
And then she just started throwing the bad ones into the woods. And I'm like, no, I was going to identify those. But but she's like, don't eat this. It will kill you. And I was like, I did know that.
I
But
thought that. Yep.
yeah,
But now it's
but
confirmed.
yeah, thank you. So she did help me identify some of my small porcini mushrooms, which are a little trickier to identify because you can't see all of the features because they're small and a little
Uh-huh.
hidden. So um, it was a good experience to know that what I had believed myself was correct in someone else's eyes and
Yes.
someone more experienced.
Yeah.
So uh, that was a really great interaction, and I have not seen that woman since, and it makes me sad every day because I would like to thank her. That was like 10 years ago, for opening up the world of like edible mushroom hunting to me. She really
That's
had a big impact.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I love that. Just a chance encounter, and it ended up teaching you so much. But I'm sure now, too, you probably have enough knowledge. You'll probably end up passing that knowledge along to some other
Yeah,
newbie. So,
every year I usually take a couple of people out, like a couple of new people that have never been mushroom hunting. I take them along, and it it's a good experience. We all get to enjoy a walk in the woods, and if we find mushrooms, it's great. If not, it gives people a new perspective because most people
yeah.
don't notice all of the fungus around them,
Yep.
and unless you're walking by and looking down, you're really not gonna notice. So it gives you just a
So true.
whole new perspective into the world of fungi just
So
by
true.
going on a little foyer.
So, I think I have to wrap up the mushroom conversation specifically with asking what is your favorite meal to make with the mushrooms?
Oh, so um usually when I collect them, I usually just like saute them,
Hmm.
dry saute them. And then once they release all their moisture and reabsorb them, I put in some butter and some garlic and then I just like put them on anything and everything. And
Okay.
honestly, it is probably too much for most people. So, and putting that mixture on top of pasta is kind of the best. But the favorite meal that I've ever had with mushrooms that I have found was we were camping with my friends, and one of them was an expert trout fisherman. So I went
Ooh.
mushroom hunting and he went trout fishing. And we came back and we made a meal of mushroom and trout for dinner that night. And it was just great. Cooked in bacon
Wow.
grease. And there's nothing wrong with that.
No, that just adds to it.
Yeah.
Amazing. I mean,
Yeah.
there's also nothing like things that you just caught in the wild or, harvested right where you were. I feel like that just adds so much to the experience. Like it just makes it taste better too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, one other question that I wanted to delve into is, and especially was eager to interview you just because you are somebody who, even though you're working a really cool, awesome job, working at aerospace, it's still, a 9 to 5 or probably more than that hours per week, an intense job. And you're still trying to fit in these outdoor adventures of lots of variety, whether it's foraging or biking or camping. So I'm curious if you have any tips for folks that are trying to fit adventure around the margins of already very full life and other responsibilities.
Yeah. So I don't think that I would call myself a particularly adventurous person. So like, especially, so I live in Colorado, and being surrounded by the adventurous culture of Colorado quickly makes you feel like you're not adventurous enough. Um,
There's
I
always
don't,
more you could do, but
yeah,
I personally found you to be adventurous, and you certainly helped me re-embrace adventures
yeah,
last year. So,
thank you. Yes, so there is always more you can do. And I think that's like a key part of trying to embrace adventure
yeah.
everywhere is that you don't have to compare yourself to all the people that you're surrounded by, and they're like 15 backpacking trips a year, um, or they lived 6 months in a van or something like that. It's about
Yep.
fitting in adventure in wherever you can. One thing that we did while you were in Colorado is we just planned like weekly mountain biking rides just in Green Mountain. And it was really nice to just like, I know we had the time and it was pretty close to my house. I know it was a bit of a drive for you, Jen. Um, but just the hour and a half of getting outside, being on a bike and just pedaling around, stopping and chatting, enjoying the views and
Yes.
enjoying the prairie. That is, I would say, the perfect way to get adventure um, with a
Yes.
9 to 5 job.
Well, and what was so impressive for me about that was I think we did it once or twice after work, which is my kind of go-to, like mentally, that's my default is I'm like, oh, okay, sure. After work, I could have adventures. But then we went through the daylight savings time change and we were, then it was like, oh, it's going to be too dark after work to go. And I think you suggested, well, what if we did it before work? And I was like, whoa, I would not have considered that. But realizing with what the daylight hours were, we decided on Friday morning. And I think we did that a couple of times too. And realizing that, okay, with just a little bit of foresight, we could have an early morning adventure before we both have to go to work. It made Fridays so much better to start with a mountain bike ride.
I agree. It was wonderful. I really enjoyed. Also, that I unlocked my day in the same way. Like I also
Yes.
default to after work adventures. I would never
Hmm.
consider a before work adventure.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that we were able to figure that out together because it
Yes.
really made, yeah, it made those days quite wonderful. And I was like ready at 9 a.m. for work, which is
Yeah.
not too late of a start time,
Yeah.
and had a full day of just productive post adventure working and then a weekend to look forward to. It was
Right.
kind of perfect.
Yeah, and you have this, like, sense of accomplishment, like, "Hell yeah, I already went for a mountain bike ride this morning, like, I can do anything. It's a Friday, and I have the whole weekend for other adventures." It's just, like, a
Yeah.
great way to jumpstart everything.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And in during mushroom hunting season, similarly, I am doing post work. I leave at 5 and I'm able to be on the trail at 5:30, and then the sun sets at right around 8 and I'm able to get a solid couple of hours in just
Nice.
looking for mushroom hunting after work. And I'm also able to uh bring other people from work on that adventure too if they wanted to join. And
That's
it's a really
awesome that
good,
you could
yeah.
just go straight from work, so you don't even really
Yeah.
have to, like, deal with all the logistics of going home or getting back out. It's
Yep.
just, like, you just kinda keep moving. You're already
Yeah.
up and moving from work, keep moving straight to the adventure.
Yeah. And I keep my foraging bag in my car, so I'm ready to go at any
Nice.
point.
Okay. Well, I think those are 2 great tips, like, either sort of pack whatever adventurous things along with you in the car and maybe think about how you can go on your way to or from work, but also don't be afraid of those early mornings because that could really help unlock a whole lot of extra time for adventures.
Yes, for sure. For sure.
Wow, awesome. Any other last, words, tips, stories of adventures, things that we didn't get to talk about that you wanted to?
So I did want to talk about how I planned my northern Colorado or California trip if you
Yes.
wanted to talk about that.
Please, yes. You mentioned you kind of had two big things that you really wanted to do.
Yeah. And so I put those two things on the map and then I looked for some campgrounds that I wanted to stay at. And they were kind of like off grid campgrounds. They weren't like full hookups or anything like that. They were at the state parks that were
Okay.
nearby. And I did book my reservations with them because it was the off season. It was pretty easy to do.
Yeah.
And then for my travel out to California, I was just taking I-80 out there. So I marked a few places that I could stop at on I-80
Mhm.
and just wanted to pull over whenever I had a moment. So I had a couple of state parks that had first come first serve camping. And
Nice.
again, because it was the off season, it was October.
Mhm.
I was able to pretty quickly, it was like 10 p.m. when I pulled in my first night. I was able to pretty quickly just find a spot that was open and drive in. No one wanted, it was Winnemucca, Nevada. No one wanted to be there off season. And um, because of the cool setup on the Tacoma with the Alucab, basically pulled in my spot, put on the parking brake, and put the checks under the wheels, popped the top of the camper, and I was able to be in bed in 10 minutes. And it was just the most amazing experience. Like, you can't get into a hotel bed faster than that.
Right?
And it was
Yes.
just like
So
so,
easy.
and that was my first night solo on the road. And it was just so affirming that I was fully capable of doing this and such a great
Yes.
experience that the rest of the trip was just easy.
Oh,
And
I love that. Nothing like a great first night to really, yeah, give you confidence about the rest of the
yeah,
trip. That's great.
and I also had planned, should that not work out for me, that I could just stay in one of the hotels in Winnemucca, which was like
Sure.
a 10-minute drive back into town, and that would have been fine. Um,
Nice.
for the rest of the trip, I did stay at a couple of hotels, except for one, or not a couple of hotels, a couple of campgrounds,
Mhm.
except for one night where I just got poured on during the whole day. So I was like, I don't want to sleep. I'm soaked. I don't want to sleep in that bed in
Nope.
the camper. So I was just like, I get in a hotel. And I did.
Yep.
And it was fine. And I got a nice shower and I got a nice meal
Got to dry
and
out a
I
little.
dried out my clothes and then continued the rest of the trip just fine. And I think that's a nice bit of flexibility to have if you're going to somewhat populated places, which
So true.
I was. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Well, and just so nice to have that attitude of being flexible to kind of roll with the weather, and it's like, yeah, you can be prepared for it or mitigate it, but sometimes it's like do yourself a favor and sort of give yourself an easy night occasionally, especially
Yeah.
to dry stuff out. Sometimes there's really no other way.
Yeah, and if you're I mean, I had a raincoat and everything, I was fully prepared,
Right.
but there is only
Yeah.
so much that can
Yeah.
do, and I would rather have an adventure during the day than a dry
Yes.
place than a keeping everything dry so I can have a place to sleep at night. It's just
Yep.
that trade-off
The
was easy to
trade-off.
make. Yeah,
Yeah.
adventure
Y
versus, um, sleeping outside all the time. I was like,
yeah.
"Adventure and a hotel. Sounds great."
Yes. Yeah. Good to be aware of those trade-offs.
Yeah.
Any other
Mhm.
notes from that trip, about
Mhm.
planning it?
Oh, I did pick one of the, campgrounds that was on the beach, and it was a good
Mm,
in Lost Coast, California is where I was headed to, Lost Coast Trail, and
okay.
I wanted to do, an out and back on the Lost Coast Trail when I got there. And I think I ended up doing 7 or 8 miles. And there was a campground that was on the beach, and it was just supposed to be really nice. um, and and it was just a bunch of overlanding people, which is cool. It's cool. But they all had their campers all set up and parked next to each other. And I was just like, this is not the solitude that I was looking for. So it was a bunch of
Yeah.
people that were overlanding and they made it to this beautiful campground right on the beach. But it was just so many people that I was like, I don't that's not exactly what I was looking for. So I actually
Right.
just turned around. I headed back for the trees and found one of the other campgrounds that was on my map,
Yeah.
and I stayed there that night, which was just it was just me. I was the only one in that
Oh,
entire campground,
nice.
and it
Oh,
just wasn't as scenic, but it was beautiful to me because it was amongst the trees and quiet.
I
And
love that. I would choose the same as you. Like, I will choose the solitude and trees over nice views and people anytime just because I love that experience camping. I'm so with you. I know not everyone's got their own reasons for getting out there and camping, but, oh, give me that deserted tree campground any day.
Mhm. Like, I totally understand why that was the destination for so many people. Like,
Sure.
I get
It
it.
makes
It's just
sense.
not for me, and
Yep.
that's fine, and we learned that about ourselves. And I still
Yep.
got to go do that out and back hike that I wanted to do. I drove from my campground that was 20 minutes away to the parking lot of the beach campground. I parked
Yeah.
there for the day. I did the out and back, and then I was gone.
Yep. I totally sympathize with that though too.
Yeah.
Nothing like a little solitude amidst some amazing trees. And that's why
Mhm.
one of the reasons I'm so happy to be back in the Pacific Northwest and just be surrounded by them. I'm loving it.
I'm so
Like,
jealous. I have to do vacations to get those
yes.
trees,
Or
which is
or
fine.
business trips and then
Yeah,
we'll go out on the mountain biking trails here.
yeah.
Well, I think that's a good place to leave the conversation for today. So thank you so much for your time, Michael.
Thank you, Jen. This was really fun. I appreciate it.
Hey guys, if you made it all the way to the end, thanks so much for your time this week. And if you'd like to learn more specifically about overlanding and how to access campsites outside of the campground, I'd recommend revisiting our first couple episodes where me and my husband Matt dive into what exactly overlanding is, why we love it so much, and how to find good campsites outside of campgrounds. You'll find a lot more content, links to additional resources, and other awesome adventures to follow on our website for the show, blueyonder-adventures.com. And I'll also be sharing all of that content and links to others at Blue Yonder Jen at Instagram or Threads. And we'll be back next week with more. But until then, hope to find you out in the wild blue yonder.